My name is Moshe Milevsky, sometimes Moshe or Mo, depending on who I'm talking to. My day job is teaching undergraduate and graduate students at the Schulich School of Business within the finance area. I teach courses on wealth management, insurance, pensions, retirement income planning, and I have recently been appointed as the CIT Chair in Financial Services at the Schulich School. So that would be what's on my business card.
This is Podcast or Perish, a podcast about academic research and why it matters. My name is Cameron Graham, Professor of Accounting at the Schulich School of Business in Toronto. Moshe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit more about the courses that you teach. You're dealing with a younger group of students?
I am. As I'm sure you know, we tend to specialize when we teach, and once we've taught something and we're good at it, there's economies of scale there. So the course that I've been teaching over the last few years is on personal finance and wealth management to third and fourth year BBA students. It's actually a two-part course. In the fall, it's Finance 3050, which is basically an introduction to wealth management, and then in the winter I do an advanced course that builds on that's on retirement income planning. So I would say that my specialization when it comes to teaching is wealth management, personal finance, financial literacy, specializing on younger individuals, younger students.
That's interesting because younger students don't often feel a pressing need to talk about retirement.
They don't, and in fact, that is one of the most challenging aspects of teaching BBA students pensions and retirement planning. They don't see the relevance to them. And initially it was difficult because, obviously enrollments were low and it just didn't grab them. But over time, the way I present this is sort of, first of all, this is relevant to the people around you. You'll be a lot more popular at the dinner conversation when your parents and possibly grandparents bring up questions about CPP and OAS and RIFs and retirement. And that's one aspect that's a hook that grabs them. Oh, yeah, maybe my parents will finally listen to me for a change. So that's one of them. And the other one is that what I try to do is I try to convert these topics into more technical problems. So even though they don't really appreciate the motivation, they don't have money, they don't have much in their RSP, but when you present it as a technical problem that they solve with coding and programming and algorithms and AI and various spreadsheets, they see, okay, I get it. This is an interesting technical problem as opposed to something that they feel pressing in their life. But you hit the nail on the head that one of the challenges of teaching a course like this is that it's just not very immediate and relevant to them.
You do have the advantage, though, that this course is directly within your wheelhouse in research.
Yeah, it's unclear what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Are you teaching something and spending a lot of time with students and then you gravitate towards things that are relevant to that, or is it the other way around? Did you tilt your teaching towards the things that interest you? But yes, I would say that there's definitely an overlap between the articles and the books and the teaching that I do. I'm fortunate in that way. A lot of times people are assigned courses to teach that has very, very little to do with the things that they're passionate about, and I'm glad that there's an overlap there.
Yeah, well, it's good for the students and good for you. Today I want to talk about the most recent output from this fantastic career you've had at researching around pensions and savings and wealth management and all those really intriguing topics that have to do with everyday life. They're not just abstract problems, but they're very much about everyday life. And in this book, you're going way back to everyday life for people in the 1700s. So let me read out the title of the book and then you can tell us more about it. It's called The Religious Roots of Longevity Risk Sharing, The Genesis of Annuity Funds in the Scottish Enlightenment and the Path to Modern Pension Management.
Yeah.
So the part that really leapt out to me as a former Presbyterian minister in training is the Scottish Enlightenment part. So tell us how you came to be studying this topic.
First of all, let me just back up a bit. If I could summarize my areas of interest with one sentence, a tweet, it would be, I am interested in helping people make sure that their money lasts as long as they do. I want to make sure your money lasts as long as your life. That's very different than saying I want to help you make more money. You don't want to die with too much leftovers because it's not very efficient from a tax point of view and from a utility point of view. So I want to make sure your money lasts as long as you do. Anything that is remotely connected to making making sure your money lasts as long as you do is something that interests me. So that's sort of the background, and that's a summary of 20, 25 years, 30 years of writing. So now let me answer your question. How did I get into this? Presbyterian, Scotland, Enlightenment. I mean, what in the world does that have to do with pensions? So during COVID, we are stuck in our houses, in our offices, in our rooms. We're teaching courses online, but we can't go anywhere, and that gives us a lot of time. And many of us reoriented ourselves. We learned new skills. We embarked on projects that we wouldn't have otherwise. The project that I decided to embark on, something that had always interested me, was history. And I enrolled in a course, a series of courses in a program. Everything had gone online. The University of Edinburgh in Scotland has a very good program in history. So I enrolled in that, and I started a master's in history, technically at the Department of History, Classics, and Archaeology. And I had to write a thesis. And the question was, what would I write a thesis on in history? And by chance, this is really, happenstance, one of the faculty members in the history department there, he said to me, hey, you're into pensions, right, Moshe? Yes, I'm into pensions. There's this very large collection of documents that the National Archives have, which is literally 2 blocks away, that the Presbyterian Church of Scotland gave them many decades ago about the world's first pension fund. And I said, like, you're kidding me. What is this about? And that sort of led to a lot of research on this and reading and then access to the archives. And apparently nobody had really looked at it from the perspective of finance and actuarial science and mathematics and retirement planning, which is what interested me. So I wrote a master's thesis at the Department of History, Classics, and Archaeology. I've got this thesis, and I said, you know what, thesis is not enough. I want to turn this into a book. So that is the long-winded background to why I got interested in Presbyterians in Scotland and the Enlightenment.
So what did you discover? Like, what was this pension thing about?
Yeah. So I think the word discovery is a little bit overused, especially, one of the things that they train you in history and archaeology. You're not Indiana Jones. You don't go into the archives and, oh my goodness, look at this. Look at what we found. It changes everything.
The University of Edinburgh didn't have a course on how to crack a whip?
Yeah. They have some interesting courses, mind you. There's a lot on witchcraft, oddly enough, and magic in the 18th century. So there's quite a lot to do there. Maybe they have one on whips. But the issue here is that you have to come up with a way to merge documents that other people have seen before. It's not that these things were, hidden in a crypt or a vault and I'm the first to see them, but to look at this from a slightly different perspective. To talk about it in a way that hasn't been discussed before. After all, this is a plan that existed in 1750. Others have written about it, but to approach it from a different angle. If there was a discovery, and I'm very careful with that word, if there was a discovery, is that as I was going through the list of all these ministers in the Church of Scotland in the 1740s and 50s that participated in this scheme, in this pension fund, I came across, oddly enough, the name of Adam Smith, who was an economist at the University of Glasgow. And I said, well, that's very odd. First of all, Adam Smith wasn't a Presbyterian minister. More importantly, why are there professors on a list of church ministers contributing to a pension fund? So that led to some articles and research that most people did not know about how professors petitioned to join this scheme because of the fact that Maclaurin, who was one of the mathematicians involved in this, said, hey, this is a good idea, you might want to add to it. So it was fun to come across names that I had heard of in a different context, all participating in this pension scheme. So I think that was the discovery or the excitement of, oh my goodness, Francis Hutcheson, the father of he contributed. No, he decided he didn't want to contribute. He abstained from the plan. So kind of getting into these personalities and what led them to go in and to go out, the rationales they provided.
Well, I know that a lot of the book is looking at trying to understand the different choices that people could make with various options within the plan. But maybe before we get into that, you could just give us a basic idea of what was the structure of this particular scheme or plan.
Yeah, so it was actually rather modern, and I'm using that word carefully as well. There are a lot of features that we think were invented, developed, first implemented in the 21st century, and in fact, they were all sitting within that scheme. So let me explain how this scheme worked. So the idea was that a minister and a professor that had a regular salary would join a plan that would force them to contribute a certain percentage of their salary to this plan, and in exchange, if if you were to pass away, your spouse or your children will be entitled to an annuity for the rest of their lives. So the way to think of this is it's a pension plan, it's an annuity scheme, but not for the ministers and the professors, for the spouses of the ministers and the professors, as well as their children in the event something happens to the worker. So it's an early form of life insurance, except that the life insurance was paid in the form of a pension. The technical word is reversionary annuity. So that's how this scheme worked. Anybody that joined after 1744 was forced to participate in this. Anybody that was working prior to 1744 had the option of opting out, and I could talk about later people that opted out. The only choice people had was, hey, how much do you want to contribute? There were 4 categories. You can contribute a lot, a fairly large percent, like maybe even 15% of your salary, or you contribute a little, 3% of your salary. It was up to you. It was irreversible. Once you picked the category, you have to stick with that the rest of your life. And of course, the higher your contribution rate, the better the benefit would be to the spouse and to the children in a mathematically strict relationship that had been developed by Maclaurin, who was a student of Isaac Newton. So that's in essence how this plan works. Think of it as an RRSP. You contribute money. In exchange, your spouse gets money for the rest of their lives. That's the high-level summary.
Mm-hmm. So this is a way of solving a particular social problem at that time, which is the destitution of widows and orphans.
It was, and there were a number of different schemes that had been proposed or ideas that had been proposed. There's the Elizabethan poor laws that go back 100 years before that, where parish by parish they had to do that. I think, and there is some documentary evidence to support this, that this was driven by spouses who said to their husbands, right, the ministers and the professors, hey, if something happens to you, what about me? And they come home to that day in, day out. They say, okay, I'll talk to someone in the church. And I think that it was driven by women. And in fact, there's a lot of other research that's been done that shows that life insurance industry was really developed by women who said, hey, come on, what if something happens to you, what about me?
You mentioned some things just now about the structure of the church at the time. And I wonder if you could tell me about the connection between this actuarial idea of a pension and the different structure that this particular church, the Presbyterian Church or the Church of Scotland, had compared to the hierarchical Catholic Church.
Yeah, so, I'm not an expert on Presbyterians. Very careful here. Well, that's good. So you can correct me, right? I studied in yeshiva until I was 20. So, they don't teach this in yeshiva. But what happened, first of all, you have to understand Catholic priests don't marry. So they don't have a spouse to go get a pension, right? So that's why John Knox and obviously Calvin, as they introduced these reforms after Luther and the Reformation, one of them is that ministers can marry. So it's natural that a church starts to think about, hey, there's somebody else here besides the preacher. I think that because of the hierarchical structure and the tight control of finances that you saw within the Presbyterian Church, it was easier to set up a fund like this. Alexander Webster, who was the force behind this, in terms of getting the data that he needed to be able to manage this plan, this was developed in stages. In the 1720s, the Church of Scotland tried to do it presbytery by presbytery, and it was just too small for it to work. They weren't able to diversify risk, and it was only in the 1740s that the idea came, hey, let's do this much larger. You now have thousands of people potentially, and you're able to diversify risk. I would definitely agree that the church structure, and specifically the Presbyterian church structure in Scotland, is what enabled this scheme to be successful for hundreds of years, mind you. This was wound up in 1995 and merged into some other funds. So not only was its origins interesting, its longevity and success were interesting.
There's something about the somewhat more egalitarian structure of the Presbyterian Church that is connected to the mathematical models behind these pensions. And the first section of your book I found very provocative. The title you got to that first section is, Do You Believe in Pensions? And that's really a curious question to ask because we think of pensions as just this calculative thing. A calculated amount is specified in the amount that you have to contribute to the fund, and a calculated amount is received later on. And the idea of beliefs doesn't seem to enter into it at all, but you're saying that that's fundamental to understanding pensions.
Yeah, if I can start delving into the weeds of the book, I think you need two ingredients. You need the mathematics, which you've just described, the inputs and the outputs, and to make sure that it's actuarially balanced. But you need to have people buying into the idea that they're willing to subsidize others. That they are in a group where you may not be getting a very high rate of return, but you're participating in this out of solidarity. And I think that's where the church came in as well. One of the issues with the fund was that everybody was contributing the exact same amount once they decided, the high percentage, the low percentage, regardless of age. So whether you were a new minister joining at the age of 25 and you just got your first position, or you were in your 60s, you were paying the exact same rate, and the benefit to the annuitant or to the spouse was the exact same as well.
Just clarify that, Moshe. So you're saying that if I'm 60 years old and I enter the plan and I contribute at the 25-pound rate,
Yeah,
I get a specific annuity.
yeah.
And if someone is 25 years old and starts paying the same rate, they pay it for many, many more years. And at the end, their spouse gets the same annuity, even though they've paid many, many more years.
Yeah, I know. Sounds unfair, and that's exactly what people complained in the 1740s. You can take a look at the Edinburgh Gazette, and there are actually letters like, hey, this is not fair. This is not fair. The way they phrased it is, the older people are taking advantage of the younger people. Right? If you think about it that way, if everybody gets the same rate. Nowadays, that's not how insurance works. The older you are, the more you have to pay for life insurance because you're more likely to pass away. So here's where the response is, and here I think is one of the details that really get to the essence of the plan. Alexander Webster, I consider him the COO of the fund, sends a letter back to the person who complained and said, look, I spoke to the younger brethren, and they are willing to participate in this, knowing that they are not getting as much as their older brethren out of solidarity and care and communal understanding, and because of the fact that they know that if the situation was reversed and the older person was the younger one, they would have done the same. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there was a clear understanding is, yes, there's a subsidy here, but I mean, this is the person that taught me how to say the Westminster Confession of Faith properly. That's one of the reasons this fund worked, is because people did the math, realized that there's a little bit of unfairness and said, you know what, I'm in anyway. Here's another proof of this. This is obviously speculative. Adam Smith participated in this. Adam Smith. He participated in this. He had no choice because he joined the University of Glasgow in the 1950s, but he had a choice of what level.
1750s.
1750s. He had a choice at what level to contribute. Does he contribute the high amount or does he contribute the low amount? So let me ask you to guess, give me a hypothesis, what he contributed, and I'll tell you two things about Adam Smith. He never married, ever, and when he joined, he was in his 20s. And he's a smart guy. Yeah. What do you think Adam Smith does? The wealth of nations.
Adam Smith is famous for this idea of free markets, and everybody makes their own choice. And I don't know whether he would use the phrase utility maximization, but basically everybody makes these choices, and then magically somehow it works out to the common good.
Yeah.
So what do you obviously he would contribute nothing because he's got nothing to gain from it.
So he couldn't contribute nothing because it was mandatory to contribute a little bit. But you're saying he would contribute the least he has to.
Yeah, of course.
Adam Smith, and I've got the picture in the book, contributed at the highest possible rate.
What a nice guy.
Now, so this gets us into something else. Most people know Adam Smith as the author of The Wealth of Nations. If you ask historians, they like his other book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Mm-hmm. Theory of Moral Sentiments, which he wrote 10 or 15 years before, is almost contradictory to Wealth of Nations. In fact, some German historians in the 19th century called it Das Adam Smith Problem, because it's completely inconsistent. In The Wealth of Nations, he's this cold, calculating, rational utility maximizer, although that's a term from Bentham 100 years later. But in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, it's always about doing good and helping others, and we need that moral sentiment. Adam Smith was behaving based on what he discussed in the theory of moral sentiments. I know the rate of return on this thing isn't good. No, I know the IRRs are lousy, but I'm doing this out of solidarity with all my other colleagues at the university. I've learned from Francis Hutcheson, who's much older. Do you understand what was driving the solidarity? The problem is, and this is the practical part of the book, because up until this point you'll wonder how in the world does this have anything to do with pensions in the 21st century? The practical aspect of it is that this solidarity is breaking down. Nowadays these funds are enormous, and I have no idea who I'm subsidizing, and I'm terribly upset about it. If you have a low life expectancy, you're in poor health, you're diagnosed with you're a male, and your life expectancy in the CPP is just one example. In the Canadian pension plan, you're going to be paying in for many, many years. You're not going to get very much. Your IRR will be negative in real terms. And we can do the math, and I do it with students. If you're lucky enough to have been born from genes that come from Scandinavia, you're female, just as an example, and your longevity is 100, and your grandmother is still alive at 115, you're going to get a phenomenal rate of return from the CPP. How are we going to continue to justify, and pensions are just one example, pooling in a world where I see very clearly I'm not winning from this? Car insurance and home insurance is another example. We pay an astonishing amount in home insurance. If you add up what you've paid in home insurance over the years, it far exceeds any payouts you might have received if you did. But there are others that are claiming, wait a minute, is that fair? And I think that as we start to realize that this solidarity breaks down, we have to start rethinking how pensions and annuities and insurance get priced and distributed and used. And I think that's the practical message from this book beyond the archives in the 1750s.
Well, I want to turn to a very clear problem right now in Canada, which is the moves, the noises, let's say, that the Premier of Alberta was making about carving up the CPP and creating a separate Alberta pension plan. Now, under the provisions of the CPP, any province can opt out and go their own way. That's not, particularly problematic. That's allowed. But what's very strange is that Danielle Smith's calculations that she asked to be done claimed more than half of the existing retirement savings fund in the CPP for Albertans. And I want you to tell me why she's wrong.
Yeah. So, I'm smart enough and old enough to know not to take sides in this thing, because I don't want to be. I don't want to be. I do not want to be hired by Danielle Smith, and I certainly don't want to be hired by the chief actuary of the CPP. But let me give you some context here and understanding. First of all, as you know, this QPP has their own pension plan.
This is Quebec.
This Quebec, right? So the idea that you can have a province do this is, certainly acceptable. Let me also say this, that I think that it wasn't Danielle Smith who did the actuarial mathematics. It was a consulting firm that they hired to do this. And as I'm sure you know, in this business, this all comes down to assumptions. And they made certain assumptions, and somehow these assumptions led to them taking 50% of the CPP. I saw somewhere that if Ontario had done the exact same thing, they would take 60% of the CPP, and if BC did the same thing, they would get 70% of the CPP. So if you add all of this up, everybody has a claim on 400% of the CPP. So clearly, their reductio ad absurdum here is that this can't be sustainable. I think that, and again, I want to be very careful. It's not that I have a view one way or the other. This is part of a negotiating tactic. If you are negotiating, I hate to use this word, think Trump. It's all part of a deal. So if I am about to go to negotiate about how much money I am going to extract, I'm going to come with the most aggressive accounting assumptions I can possibly come up with, because I'm not subject to GAAP or FASB, right? I'm just using actuarial. And I'm going to push for a big number. And then when the negotiations come down to you use that expected rate of return. No, maybe you should use this expected return. The number becomes more reasonable. Also, I think, and this really should wrap this up, most Albertans, when you ask them, they're not interested in this. There are surveys that were done. Do you want the CPP to carve out a portion and give you, and you might get more, you might not get more? I don't think there's a lot of, interest in this amongst the populace. Now, I'd say that, most people don't care about the CPP either. They're like, I don't know what that is. When I'm 60 years old, tell me about this, right? I know my 22-year-old BBA, like, CPP, who cares? So there's an apathy towards that as well. But my response to your question is, obviously, they can't have 55% or 50% of the CPP, because every other province would have the same claim, and there's no CPP left.
Yeah. But it really comes down to the thing you pointed out about insurance, right? That we pay into, let's say, home insurance products. And unless your home burns down, you're not really going to get a good rate of return out of that. But you're insuring yourself against this catastrophic risk, right? And that makes sense within the confines of an insurance policy. It's not like, I don't mind if I have to pay for a plumber to come and fix a leak. I'm not looking for necessarily that degree of coverage. The deductible can be fairly high on my policy and I'm fine. But if the house burns down, I'm in real trouble. Yeah. So I need to be insured against that catastrophic risk. But with a pension, it's a little bit different, right? We're basically engaging in this contract with other people to say we will pool our resources and look after each other in old age. And we're all going to suffer the same catastrophic event at some point, but it's a question of when. Yeah. Right? And so you get into this backward zone, right? That what's good for you is bad for the plan and vice versa, right? If you die early, that sucks for you, but the plan is happy because they got all your money and they didn't have to pay it out. Yeah. And if you live a long time, that's the longevity problem. That's a real problem for pension plans, is if people live a long time. Yeah. So it's the same sort of an issue, but it's on that risk is spread out over many years. It's not just a single event like your house burning down. And I think that changes the way that we think about what it is that we're actually getting out of this arrangement.
Yeah. Look, I agree with you. There's certainly differences between property and casualty insurance where, first of all, it's a completely different industry. P&C and life and health are completely separate entities. They're regulated differently. Their accounting is done differently. One-off catastrophic events disrupt your life in ways that it's almost impossible to plan for, whereby longevity, you tell someone, look, you might live to 115, you might be 95. But I agree with you that there's certainly differences in the types of insurance policies out there, and I think in all cases there's an element of solidarity. And I think that's something that's very important for people to understand. And as we become more quantitative, or at least as our algorithms become more quantitative, we're going to start to learn that, hey, even if your house burns down and the insurance company has to pay $3 million to rebuild it, add up all the premiums that you've paid in the last 30 years, adjusted for time value of money, you might have triple or quadruple paid. So where did that money go? Well, to the insurance agent making very high commissions. Oh, okay, that's interesting. And to the insurance company with a return on capital or return on equity. Oh, that's interesting. And to the fraud, right? All the fraud that we kind of take a blind eye to. Yeah, fraud is horrible. No, fraud is costing you your premium. I think we start to rethink, hey, is this the right way to arrange ourselves in our pools? And I think one of the practical takeaways is maybe we should start thinking, how small can we make our pools so that we keep our solidarity? I know the people in my neighborhood. I know the people in my community. I know the people in my church or my synagogue or my mosque. Maybe that's the way to do this, where I feel more comfortable with the subsidy and the solidarity argument, as opposed to this global entity where, I don't know, why am I overpaying? Oh, no, you're overpaying because your neighbor might... I think we have to rethink insurance, and with many products that way, as we learn to compute, even in the catastrophic scenario, what the IRR is.
Mm-hmm. I just want to clarify something about this catastrophic scenario, because it's not just the amount compared to the premiums that you pay in over your lifetime, but it's the timing of the catastrophe. If the catastrophe happens before, in the alternative scenario, you could have set aside your money and saved it up, invested it, and created a pool of your own money, right? A fund of your own money to pay for the catastrophic event. But if the catastrophic event occurs before you've saved up enough money and your investments have grown enough, you've got a problem. So it's delivering a bit of solidarity through timing.
Yeah. So I completely agree with you, and I want to be very, very clear. I spend the first hour of my lecture on insurance echoing your sentiment right now and explaining insurance. But when you take a look at the insurance products that are available to homeowners, it's very difficult to buy what you've just described. If you go to the insurance company, I don't want to name my company, although I'm dying to, because they should be put on, but when I say, hey, I want catastrophic coverage only. I want the highest deductible. I only want the absolute catastrophic coverage. I don't want to pay for all of this stuff. They say, no, we don't do deductibles above 10, or we don't do 10,000. Like, I don't need it. I want 100,000, 200. I want a catastrophic coverage. Can't do that. And when I say to them, I want to cap your payout so that you're not sitting here and arguing with contractors if something happens to my house, which is what makes the claim process so expensive. When you break down, why is it so expensive? Oh, they have to spend years in litigation. Forget litigation. I want a parametric trigger. If there's a fire in my house that's stronger than a certain amount as determined by the fire, I want a payout of $3 million. Finished. You don't have to argue with adjusters. No, we don't do that, Moshe. Why not? That would make insurance a lot cheaper. I think that's when I'm arguing. I love the idea of protection against catastrophic coverage. Give it to me, please.
Yes, but insurance companies don't have a vested interest in providing cheaper insurance. When you think about it, their entire business model is take people's money and don't give it back.
Yeah. And earn interest on it. And I think that that's part of the discussion. Let's go back to the 18th century, see how they did it then. There is no other area where you would do that. Apple isn't sitting and saying, I wonder how they did iPhones in the 18th century. But somehow when it comes to finance and insurance and protection and pooling of risk, there might be some lessons from how these things started out.
You focused on the kinds of choices that people made given some options within that particular pension scheme, the annuity scheme. What are the kinds of choices that people do get to make today in their retirement savings programs?
One of them is the same choice that Adam Smith and Francis Hutcheson and all the greats in the Scottish Enlightenment had. How much do they contribute? Do you want to, if you do nothing, the default option is that they're going to take 4%. They had a default option also in 1744. The default was the second category. If we didn't hear from, remember, this is in Scotland, right? So they had to give people 6 months to send in the mail. They sent in their notices. And if you know your history at the time, the Jacobite rebellion is taking place. And Bonnie Prince Charlie is attacking Edinburgh. And they said, no, you got to get your letter in. I don't care about no rebellion. If we don't hear from you in 6 months, you're going to get defaulted into the second category. And a lot of people were defaulted into the second category, but not as many as you see nowadays. The apathy that you see today in pension plans, they do nothing and they default into the default, didn't exist then. Nowadays, 50-60% default. You never hear from them. Yeah, just do what you want to do. Then it was only 20, maybe even 15%. I would like to argue that in the 18th century, people were more financially literate than they are today. Now you're saying, that's ridiculous. What was there to be literate about? Relatively speaking, people paid attention to their money, and they had to be more careful. The relative financial literacy was high, and that's why very few people defaulted. No, I think I'm going to make my own choice here. I'm going to go with the highest category. I'm going to go with the lowest category, or I'll contribute, or I'll decide not to contribute. So that's an example of a decision that people make today, a decision that people made 280 years ago, and they seem to be making them differently.
There's an interesting question here about why it is that people are so apathetic about this. One hypothesis might be that they have been conditioned to think that everything's just going to work out, the nanny state kind of an idea. Another would be the opposite of that, which is that they have lost faith in the system and they don't think that there's actually going to be much benefit for them down the road, that somehow this will all fall apart like everything else, like job security and so forth has fallen apart.
Yeah. I think another one is that this is just very boring. We might be fascinated by it, right? You've written articles on annuities and pensions. I've written articles. It's fascinating to us, but most people, it's like, get Kim Kardashian on your show. Maybe we'll pay attention.
Who would enjoy that? Tell me about this phrase, longevity, heterogeneity. What does that mean?
Yeah, so, it used to be that longevity, how long we live, was kind of this random variable. I don't know. We don't know. It's in God's hands, to use a biblical term. But now we're realizing there might be in a test tube. And if we, do the right genetic tests and we take the right fluids, we might get a much better picture of our longevity. And some people are doing that. I mean, I did a test. I measured the length of my telomeres, which is just a fancy way of saying what my biological age is. And my biological age was lower than my chronological age. In English, that means I have slightly better longevity prospects than the typical 58-year-old. So mortality or longevity heterogeneity, to answer your question, is when you and I know a little bit more about our longevity prospects than everybody else does, and they might be better than everybody else in our pool. How would that be relevant? Well, hey, this is very interesting. So I have good genes. I've been taking care of myself. The biological age profile came back 10 years younger than my chronological age. I'm going to be around a while, so I got to save more. I got to plan for longer. Maybe I should go out and buy an annuity, because an annuity will pay me for the rest of my life, and maybe it'll be a good deal. Whereas if that test result came back and said, no, Moshe, you're not looking at a long time, I wouldn't buy that. Longevity heterogeneity is the separation of longevity from this wide, vague pool to, yeah, I know a little bit more about it than someone else does. And I think that information helps us make better financial decisions.
Now, what's interesting, I think, that you pointed out in your book is that this longevity heterogeneity is not random. It's actually associated with things like wealth. So you end up with this, if I can use the word, class conflict between those who are more likely to benefit from a longer draw on the pension system because they're going to live longer, and those who are more likely to die shortly after they retire. And that difference is related to income and wealth.
It is. In fact, when you look back at things that have shocked you when you read them, that you remember, we read hundreds of articles a year. Some of them stick in your head. One of the ones that stuck in my head was a few years ago, a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association, done by economists, interestingly enough, that shows the relationship between income that you just pointed out and life expectancy. This was done in the U.S. If your income is in the lowest quintile or the lowest decile versus your income is in the highest deciles, you're talking about a life expectancy gap of 10 to 15 years. You live 10 to 15 years longer. Is it the income that's buying you longevity? Is it the income that teaches you through education to take care of yourself better? Is there some other channel by which this is taking place? Income and longevity definitely are associated with each other, and if income is correlated with wealth, there you go, the wealthy live longer. That study took place in the U.S., which has a very, very skewed longevity distribution. I mean, you have states with life expectancies that really take you back to the 18th century. This was done in Canada by two economists, and they found something not as extreme, but similar. Again, wealth, income associated with greater longevity. So if you are a female that happens to be wealthy and living in BC, your life expectancy is going to be a lot higher than, male, and let's pick Nova Scotia as just the other side of the country. So yes, longevity is associated with income and wealth. And in the book, I talk about a few other things that are less expected. Longevity tends to be associated with religious beliefs, which is a controversial finding. Not a lot of people want to hear that belief does that. And usually the channel there is part of a community, part of a group of people. They take care of each other. They're more likely to, eat better, eat healthy, activities are less risky. But that's an association. And in fact, there's a subgenre of research in demographics that tries to find blue zones, areas of the world where people live longer. And is it diet? Is it because they garden? Is it stress? Less stress? So the short answer is absolutely, absolutely. There is a huge heterogeneity in longevity.
Well, this takes us back to the recommendation that you're making out of this book, which is that we need to rethink how we do these pension schemes. And if I get the gist of your suggestion, is that we need to look for these kind of naturally occurring areas where there is communal solidarity and perhaps orient our retirement savings schemes around, what's the right word to use, leveraging that solidarity?
Yeah. When you look at why it's developed the way it is, to quote Adam Smith, the larger you are, you have economies of scale. And if we have trillion-dollar funds, it's better for the participants than if we have billion-dollar funds. And billion-dollar funds are better than million-dollar funds. And, because we're going to squeeze the fees down. There's a lot of evidence that you don't really squeeze the fees down proportionally or absolutely, but more importantly, these massively large insurance schemes where I'm subsidizing someone on the other side of the world just doesn't grab my moral sense. Adam Smith's moral sentiment. I just don't feel a solidarity if my money is going to subsidize, an earthquake in Taiwan.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just don't feel it. Oh, so this is staying within Canada. Okay, so if something happens in BC, okay, I feel a little bit more there. I'm helping my fellow Canadian. And I think that's one of the issues that we're going to have to contend with as people learn what they're really getting from all these funds that they're participating in. The analytics are out there.
I understand what you're saying, but it's not just about learning about the analytics. It's also about the breakdown of that solidarity in society. We become more and more tribal as a society, and that can fracture that sense of belonging to something. It used to be very clear to most people in Canada what it meant to be Canadian. Even if we were completely wrong about that, we had this shared understanding of, this Canada was this place with, peacekeepers and Mounties and stuff like that. And we found out that some of our national symbols weren't all that they held themselves out to be.
Yeah.
And as a result, or at least continuous with that, you've got this breakdown of the sense of community. And you end up with provinces wanting to go their own way. So there's a lot of differences and a lot of fragility in our systems for looking after each other.
Yeah. And I think just to that point, you've just discussed something that's of a first order importance. Pensions are of a third order importance. I mean, when you think about what are the things that keep people up at night, it's some of the things that you've discussed, and not whether the IRR on my CPP is high enough to justify participating in it, but it's certainly part of the bigger picture. It's a good example of solidarity. Hey, you're part of this scheme and this fund and this pool, and there's some benefits to it.
Well, if we start dreaming in terms of pension acronyms, I think we know the battle's been lost.
Yeah.
Thank you, Moshe, for talking to me about this book. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.